Maxim Kravchenko's hands hadn't stopped shaking for 3 months. Not since the accident, not since the fire, not since he'd carried his partner's body out of the collapsed warehouse and realized the screaming he heard was his own. The official report called it industrial disaster. Maxim called it the day he stopped sleeping. The pills they gave him sat untouched in his jacket pocket, rattling like teeth in a jar every time the UAZ hit another pothole. He'd tried them once. The numbness was worse than the nightmares. His security company had put him on extended leave, corporate speak for don't come back until you stop flinching at loud noises. 3 months of mandatory therapy sessions where he nodded at the right times and said what they wanted to hear. 3 months of staring at his apartment ceiling, counting cracks and seeing flames in the patterns. 3 months of realizing that the city, with its sirens, its crowds, its endless noise, was slowly killing him in ways the fire never could. The job posting had appeared on his phone at 3 in the morning, during one of those nights when sleep felt like enemy territory. Game warden needed. Vologda Oblast. Remote location. Minimal human contact. The last line had sold him. Previous occupant departed unexpectedly. Immediate start available. Maxim had applied before dawn, not because he wanted the job, but because the alternative was another night staring at his ceiling, counting the cracks and seeing faces in them. Now, 6 hours deep into the Taiga, he was beginning to question that decision. Pavel, the driver Merkulov had sent, looked like he'd been carved from the same wood as the trees surrounding them. 70 kilometers back, they'd passed the last cell tower. 50 kilometers back, the last village. 30 kilometers back, even the logging roads had ended. Now they were following something that might charitably be called a trail, if you were drunk and optimistic. The forest pressed in from all sides, dense and old and watching. "You know why the last guy left?" Maxim asked, more to break the suffocating silence than from genuine curiosity. Pavel's jaw worked for a moment, like he was chewing the question. His eyes never left the path ahead. Ignatich? 30 years he was out here. 30. Then one morning, he's on the radio. Voice I never heard from him before. High, scared. Saying he needs extraction immediately. Says he can't do it anymore, needs to see his grandchildren. The UAZ lurched over a fallen log, and Pavel's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "Thing is," he continued, voice dropping, "Ignatich never married. No kids, no grandkids. We all knew that. But Merkulov sent the helicopter anyway. Semyonov, the pilot, he brought him out. Said the old man wouldn't stop looking over his shoulder the whole flight. Wouldn't say what at." Pavel spat out the window. 3 days later, Ignatich was dead. Heart attack, they said. But Semyonov told me the old man's last words were, "It followed me out." Before Maxim could process that, the forest opened like a mouth, and there it was. The Sukovsky cordon sat on a rise above a river so dark it looked like spilled oil. The cabin itself was bigger than expected, built from logs that had gone black with age and weather. Smoke curled from a chimney. Fresh smoke. "Someone's been maintaining it," Maxim observed. Pavel didn't answer, just started unloading boxes with jerky, too-fast movements. Supplies, ammunition, canned food, a battered radio that looked older than Maxim. As they worked, Maxim noticed Pavel wouldn't look directly at the cabin. His eyes kept sliding away, fixing on the forest, the river, anywhere else. When the last box hit the ground, Pavel grabbed Maxim's arm hard enough to bruise. "Listen, you were military, yeah? So you know about bad ground, places that feel wrong." His eyes were desperate. "This whole area, it's bad ground. Has been since before my grandfather's time. You follow the rules, you might be okay. You get curious, you start asking questions. He jerked his head toward the cabin. You end up like him. The UAZ's engine was still warm when Pavel climbed in. "Wait," Maxim called out. "What rules?" But the truck was already moving, Pavel's face pale behind the dirty windshield. "Check the table," he shouted back. Then he was gone, the sound of the engine fading impossibly fast, swallowed by trees and distance and something else Maxim couldn't name. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was total. No birds, no insects, just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the muscular sound of the river below. Maxim stood there, his military training screaming that something was tactically wrong with this entire situation. The hairs on his neck were up. His breathing had gone shallow. These were the same tells his body gave him the day before the building in Kherson, the day before everything went wrong. He forced himself to walk to the cabin, not run. Running showed fear. Fear attracted predators. Even here, especially here, that rule held. The cabin's interior hit him with a wall of wood smoke and something else, something organic and old. The main room was dominated by a cast iron stove, still radiating heat. Someone had fed it recently, very recently. A heavy wooden table sat center, flanked by hand-carved chairs. Bunks lined one wall. Shelves held oil lamps, tools, rope, boxes of ammunition. Everything practical, nothing decorative. It reminded him of forward operating bases, places where men lived knowing death was a neighbor, not a stranger. On the table sat a tin mug. The tea inside was still warm. Maxim touched it with one finger, then pulled back like it had burned him. Fresh. Hours old, at most. But Pavel said no one had been here since Ignatich left 3 weeks ago. He was about to investigate further when he saw it. A notebook, placed precisely in the center of the table, positioned so it would be the first thing anyone entering would see. The cover was water-stained, warped, and on it, in careful block letters, "Read this first." Maxim's hands were steadier than they'd been in months as he opened the notebook. Maybe it was the familiar feel of a threat assessment. Maybe it was just that external danger felt cleaner than the chaos in his head. The first page held a single sentence in cramped handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm either dead or I ran. Either way, you're fucked unless you listen." He turned the page. What he found wasn't a diary. It was a survival manual. 8 rules, written in different inks, added over time. Some in steady hands, others in frantic scrawls. Each one numbered, underlined. And in the margins, dates, incidents, confirmations. This wasn't paranoid rambling. This was documentation. Rule 1. Never stay in the forest after dark. Not because you'll get lost, because they don't come out until the sun is gone. I've tested this. Sunset is the line. Cross it outside, and you won't make it back. The word "they" was capitalized, underlined 3 times. Maxim felt his jaw tighten. In the military, when someone used "they" like that, it meant enemy forces, tangible, human. But something in the way this was written suggested the author wished it was that simple. Rule 2. The old clearing north of here, past the Black Stream. There are wolf traps there from my grandfather's time. If you hear crying from that direction, especially a woman crying, do not investigate. I lost 2 weeks of memory once. Woke up at the edge of that clearing with mud on my boots and blood under my fingernails. Not my blood. Maxim's training said coincidence, animal attacks, possible mental deterioration from isolation. But his gut, the same gut that had kept him alive in Kherson, said something different. Rule 3. Test the door bolt every 3 days. keep it greased. When it comes to the door, that bolt is the only thing that matters. Not your gun, not your training. The bolt. When it comes, singular, specific, known. This wasn't abstract fear. This was experience writing. Rule 4. The bell. If you hear a bell at night, don't move. Don't look. Don't breathe loud. I've heard it 11 times. 11. It's checking, waiting for a mistake. Maxim stopped reading, set the notebook down, walked to the window and looked out at the forest in the failing afternoon light. The trees stood like silent witnesses, ancient pines, some probably centuries old. And somewhere in that vast green darkness, something that rang a bell. He wanted to laugh, wanted to call this the fantasy of a senile old man, but his hands had stopped shaking for the first time in 3 months, and that terrified him more than any words in a notebook. He returned to the table, kept reading. Rule 5. Fog comes fast here, unnatural fast. If you're caught in it and hear your name, don't answer. It doesn't see. It listens. Move silent. I answered once. Only once. It found me. I still have the scars. Rule 6. The old bathhouse by the river. Board it up. Never open it. What's inside needs to stay inside. Trust me. Rule 7. Barefoot prints in the forest. Fresh ones. Human-sized. If you see them, return to the cabin immediately. Don't track them. They're tracking you. Rule 8. If the radio says help is coming and you didn't call for it, it's not help. The last rule had a date next to it, September 28th, 2 days before Ignatich called for extraction, and below it, in handwriting that devolved into barely controlled scrawl, they're learning, they're adapting. It used Semyonov's voice yesterday. Perfect. How do they know? How do they know? Maxim closed the notebook and sat in the gathering darkness. His therapist had told him he needed to process his trauma, to sit with his fear and examine it. Well, here was fear. Clean, external, something he could maybe understand. Not like the shapeless dread that woke him screaming about buildings and bodies and the sound Bondar made at the end. He stood and began a perimeter check, automatic as breathing. Tested the door bolt. It stuck, grinding. Found the grease tin under the stove, exactly where the notebook said. Worked the mechanism until it moved silent and sure. Checked the carbine. Loaded. Good condition. Checked sight lines from the windows. Identified cover positions. Noted the boarded bathhouse downstream, its door sealed with fresh planks. Someone had reinforced that recently. Very recently. As he worked, the light bled out of the sky. The forest changed. Maxim felt it like a pressure shift before a storm. The quality of the silence altered, became expectant. The river's sound seemed to fade, though logically he knew it flowed the same. He lit the oil lamp with steady hands and positioned it away from windows. Basic tactics. Don't silhouette yourself. Full dark came with a totality that city-born people never experience. Maxim had known darkness in combat, moonless nights in hostile territory. But this was different. This darkness felt old, watchful. He sat at the table, the notebook in front of him, and forced himself to eat cold stew from a can. Hydrate. Maintain routine. These were things he could control. Midnight came and went, marked only by his watch. Maxim lay in the bunk farthest from the door, fully clothed, boots on. The carbine was within arm's reach. Sleep felt impossible, but exhaustion is a patient hunter. Somewhere around 2 a.m., his eyes closed, his breathing deepened, and the cabin settled into the rhythm of night. The sound that woke him wasn't loud. That's what made it terrible. A whisper of noise, so faint he almost missed it. His eyes opened, He didn't move, didn't change his breathing. In hostile territory, you wake quiet. You wake ready. The cabin was dark except for the stove's dying glow. And from outside, from the direction of the forest, came a sound that made his blood ice over. A bell, small, delicate, like something you'd put on a cat's collar. Ding, ding, ding. Musical, pleasant even, moving closer. Maxim's body wanted to bolt, to grab the carbine, to do something. But Rule 4 burned in his mind. Don't move, don't look. The bell circled the cabin, slow, methodical. He could track its progress by sound. North wall, east, coming around to the door. It stopped there, right outside, maybe 2 meters from where he lay, frozen. The silence stretched, became torture. Then came a new sound, scraping, methodical, something being dragged across the door's wooden surface, testing, searching, and beneath it, so quiet he almost missed it, breathing, deep, wet, wrong. The scraping stopped. Maxim counted heartbeats, 15, 20, then footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving away, and with each step, that bell, ding, 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 fading into the forest, into silence. Maxim lay there until dawn, every muscle locked, afraid that even the sound of his breathing might call it back. When gray light finally seeped through the shutters, he rose on shaking legs. No, not shaking, trembling. There was a difference. Shaking was fear. Trembling was adrenaline, combat reflex. His hands were steady as he drew the bolt and opened the door. The morning was cold, mist rising from the river. The ground outside the door was soft earth, churned by boots, his own from yesterday. And there, in the center, something that stopped his breath. Not a footprint, the absence of one. A perfectly smooth circle in the disturbed earth, as if something had stood there, hovering. And at the edge of the circle, drawn with deliberate care in the dirt, 3 parallel lines. Claw marks, or something else, a signature. Maxim Kravchenko had survived Kherson by trusting his instincts. Those instincts were screaming now. But they weren't screaming run. They were screaming something worse. They were screaming that this, somehow, was exactly where he needed to be. That whatever walked the forest at night was less terrifying than the things walking through his memories. At least here, the monsters were outside. He picked up the notebook from the table and flipped to the back pages. Found what he was looking for. A final entry dated September 29th. I can't do this anymore. It knows my name now. It called me last night in my dead wife's voice. I never told anyone here I was married. How does it know? I'm calling for extraction. If you're reading this, new guy, I'm sorry. I tried to warn Merkulov, but he thinks I'm senile. Maybe I am. Maybe this is all in my head. But the scratches on my door are real. The footprints are real. And the bell, God help me, the bell is real. Maxim set the notebook down and walked to the window. The taiga stretched endlessly, beautiful and ancient and absolutely indifferent to human fear. Somewhere in that green vastness, something waited for nightfall. And Maxim Kravchenko, veteran of Kherson, survivor of horrors both foreign and domestic, understood with crystal clarity that he had just enlisted in a new kind of war. One where the enemy followed rules he didn't understand, where the battlefield was everywhere and nowhere, where retreat meant madness or death. His hands were steady as stone as he began preparing for the next night, because that's what soldiers do. They adapt, they prepare, they survive. Day 3. Maxim broke Rule 1. Not intentionally. He'd been tracking deer prints north of the Black Stream, lost in the rhythm of movement. the familiar comfort of a mission with clear parameters. When he finally checked his watch, the sun was already kissing the tree line. 20 minutes to full dark, 40 minutes back to the cabin at a run. The math was simple and terrifying. He ran. Branches whipped his face. His breath came in ragged gasps. The forest changed around him as light bled from the sky, colors fading to gray, then to shades of black. Shadows pooled between trees like oil. And in those last 5 minutes of twilight, as he burst into the clearing and saw the cabin ahead, Maxim heard it. Behind him, keeping pace. Not footsteps, something else. A rhythmic sound like wet fabric being dragged through leaves. He hit the cabin door at full speed, scrabbled the bolt closed, and stood there, gasping. Outside, the dragging sound stopped. Silence. Then, clear as a bell, because it was a bell, ding, 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 starting from exactly where the dragging had stopped, circling the cabin. But it was only 6:47 p.m. Not midnight, not the deep night when it usually came. It was testing him, punishing him, teaching him that rules existed for reasons. The bell made 3 complete circles, then stopped at the door. Maxim waited for the scraping, the breathing, the voice. Instead, something slid under the door, a piece of paper, old and water-stained. He stared at it for a full minute before picking it up with shaking hands. It was a page torn from a notebook. Ignatich's handwriting. Rule 9. If you break Rule 1, it gets to break 1 too. Maxim's blood went cold. This wasn't in the notebook he'd found. Ignatich had written more rules, hidden them, or maybe this thing had taken them. The bell resumed, moving away into the forest. Ding, 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 growing fainter. But the message was clear. The game had changed. He didn't sleep that night. Just sat at the table, the carbine loaded, watching the door. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion started playing tricks. The shadows in the corners seemed to move. The wind sounded like whispers. He was nodding off when the radio crackled to life. Impossible. He'd removed the battery yesterday. He'd watched himself do it. But there it was on the shelf, fully assembled, power light, glowing green. Pavel's voice came through, but wrong. Too clear. No static. Kravchenko, thank God. Listen, we're coming to get you. Helicopters inbound, ETA 20 minutes, emergency extraction, just sit tight. Maxim stared at the radio. He hadn't called for extraction. Rule 8 burned in his mind. But Pavel's voice continued, urgent now. Maxim, did you hear me? We're coming. Merkulov's orders. Something's happened in the region. All remote stations are being evacuated. You need to be ready to move fast. Every instinct screamed at him to believe it, to pack, to prepare, to get the hell out. But his hand went to the radio's back panel, popped it open, empty, no battery. The voice was still talking, but the radio had no power source. Maxim ripped the entire unit off the shelf and threw it against the wall. It shattered. Circuits and plastic scattered across the floor. And from the broken speaker, a sound. Not static. Laughter. Low and wet and utterly inhuman. Cut short as the last component died. His hands were shaking again. Not trembling. Full shaking. Because this thing wasn't just mimicking voices on radio frequencies. It was manifesting them, creating sound from nothing. The rules weren't just survival tips. They were documentation of capabilities. Each rule represented a test Ignatich had failed or barely survived. How many rules had there been originally? How many had been torn out or taken? Morning came with fog, thick as cream, exactly like Rule 5 warned. Maxim stood at the window, watching it roll in, erasing the forest meter by meter. By 8 a.m., he couldn't see past the woodpile. By 9 a.m., The cabin was an island in white nothing. That's when he heard his name. Maxim. Not Dmitri's voice this time, his mother's. She'd been dead 6 years, but there she was, calling him like she used to when dinner was ready. Maxim, honey, come here. I need to show you something. He bit his lip hard enough to draw blood. The pain helped, kept him anchored. His mother's voice circled the cabin in the fog, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Why won't you answer me? Are you angry? Maxim, please. I'm scared out here. I don't know where I am. The pleading in her voice was perfect. Every inflection matched his memories. But his mother's last words to him had been, "I'm proud of you," whispered in a hospital room. Not this. Never this. The voice changed tactics, became his commanding officer from the security company, then his ex-wife, then Dmitri again. A carousel of voices, all people who knew him, all perfectly rendered. It cycled through his entire life, fishing for the one voice that would make him break, make him open the door or respond. Hours passed. The fog refused to lift. And Maxim sat at the table, hands pressed over his ears, reciting technical specifications from his security training. Anything to drown out the voices of everyone he'd ever loved, weaponized against him. Around 3 p.m., the fog finally thinned. The voices stopped. Maxim approached the window on unsteady legs and looked out. The clearing around the cabin was wrong. Trees that should be there weren't. The river sounded like it was coming from the wrong direction. And there, at the edge of the fog, a figure, tall, too tall, standing perfectly still, facing the cabin. The fog obscured details, but Maxim could see it was wrong. The proportions didn't match human anatomy. Arms too long, head tilted at an angle that should break a neck. He grabbed the carbine, chambered around. The figure didn't move. Maxim's training said, identify your target, assess the threat, respond proportionally. But what was the proportional response to something that wore voices like masks and rewrote reality's rules? He raised the weapon, sighted through the window. The figure remained motionless. Then, slowly, it raised one too long arm and pointed. Not at Maxim, at something beside the cabin. Maxim followed the gesture. The boarded bathhouse. The figure was pointing at the bathhouse. As Maxim watched, the boards sealing the bathhouse door began to crack. One by one, snap, snap, snap. Nails pulling free from wood. The door behind them shuddered. Something inside wanted out. The figure in the fog lowered its arm and stepped backward, dissolving into the white. The message was clear. You broke my rule. I break yours. Rule 6. The bathhouse stays closed. The last board fell. The door swung open, and from inside came a sound that Maxim's brain refused to process. Wet, organic, moving. He slammed the shutters closed, threw the bolt on every window, sat with his back against the door, carbine pointed at the entrance, waiting. Outside, something moved through the clearing, heavy, dragging, circling the cabin like a shark. Hours passed, or minutes. Time lost meaning. Then it stopped, right outside the door. A voice, his own, perfect replication. Let me in, please. I'm so tired. I just want to rest. Maxim's brain splintered trying to reconcile hearing his own voice from outside his own body. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. We can be scared together. Just open the door. The carbine felt useless in his hands. What do you shoot when the enemy is you? Then came something that saved his sanity. A different voice, real, crackling through the remains of the shattered radio, impossibly Pavel, the actual Pavel. Kravchenko, if you can hear this, don't trust anything until dawn. Repeat, nothing until dawn. Semyonov just told me. Ignatich's final journal entry. He figured it out. It can't hold forms in sunlight. Whatever you're hearing, whatever you're seeing, it's not real. Just survive until sunrise. The voice outside, his voice, screamed. Not words, just rage, pure and inhuman. The cabin shook as something massive struck the door. Once, twice. The bolt held, but the frame cracked. Another hit, and the door would fail. Maxim did the only thing he could think of. Started talking, loud, reciting everything he could remember. Security protocols, radio codes, his mother's recipes, Dimitri's bad jokes, filling the air with real voice, real memories, drowning out the thing outside that wore his skin. It worked, or it didn't. He'd never know. But the pounding stopped. The dragging sound retreated. And when gray dawn light finally crept through the shutter cracks, Maxim opened the door to find the bathhouse sealed again, boards intact, like nothing had happened, except for the deep gouges in his door. 4 parallel marks, like claw marks or fingers, and pressed into the soft earth, a single footprint, barefoot, human-sized, facing the cabin. Rule 7 manifested. Maxim added to the notebook with a hand that barely shook. Day 3. Broke Rule 1. It broke Rule 6. The bathhouse opened. Don't know what came out. Don't want to know. Pavel's message saved me. Or coincidence did. Either way, rules aren't suggestions. They're combat doctrine against an enemy that adapts faster than we do. He looked at the forest, peaceful in morning light. Somewhere in that green vastness, it was watching, learning, planning. And Maxim realized the terrible truth. Ignatich hadn't run because he was scared. He'd run because he'd figured something out, something that made staying impossible. Whatever that knowledge was, it had died with him, unless Maxim could find it first. His hands were steady as he began searching the cabin for what Ignatich had hidden. Because soldiers don't run. They gather intelligence, even when the enemy is something that shouldn't exist. The mistake happened on day 9, and it was completely mundane. Maxim was checking the northern perimeter when his boot went through rotted wood concealed by moss. His ankle twisted, pain white-hot and immediate. Not broken, but badly sprained. The walk back to the cabin took 3 hours instead of 1. The sun was already setting when he was still 2 kilometers out. He didn't panic. Panic killed people. Instead, he moved with deliberate care, using a broken branch as a walking stick, watching the light bleed from the sky with clinical detachment. This was a tactical problem. He had maybe 20 minutes of usable light. The cabin was 30 minutes away at his current pace. The math was simple and unforgiving. 15 minutes later, full darkness caught him. The forest transformed instantly, like a switch had been thrown. Sounds he hadn't noticed during the day became amplified. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves. The beam of his flashlight created a small bubble of reality in an ocean of black. Beyond that circle, anything could exist. Maxim kept moving, each step on his injured ankle a separate negotiation with pain. That's when he heard it. Not the bell this time. Footsteps. Heavy boots on forest floor, matching his pace exactly. Staying just outside his light's reach. He stopped. The footsteps stopped. He turned, sweeping the flashlight in an arc. Nothing, just trees and darkness. He resumed walking. The footsteps resumed, perfectly synchronized, mocking him. "I know you're there," Maxim said, voice steady. His military training said, "Establish communication, identify the threat." The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched for 5 heartbeats. Then a voice, close enough that Maxim could feel breath on his neck. "Yes, you do." It was his own voice, not recorded, not played back, speaking words he wasn't speaking, using his exact inflection and tone. Maxim spun, flashlight and carbine moving as one, nothing behind him. But now, the footsteps came from ahead, and from the left, and the right, surrounding him. Multiple sources, all perfectly synchronized. His rational mind tried to explain it. Speakers, multiple speakers. But speakers needed power, needed someone to operate them. And these moved, circling closer. The cabin appeared suddenly, a darker shape against the darkness. Maxim covered the last 100 meters at a stumbling run, pain forgotten, slammed the door, threw the bolt, stood there gasping, waiting for the familiar sounds, the circling, the bell, the testing of the door. Instead, nothing. Complete silence. The kind of silence that screamed wrongness. Then his radio crackled to life. The radio he'd destroyed. The radio currently in pieces on the shelf. Pavel's voice, crystal clear. Maxim? Thank God. Listen, we have a situation. Fedorov from the southern cordon hasn't checked in for 3 days. Merkulov wants you to hike down there tomorrow. Make sure he's okay. It's only 15 kilometers through the forest. You'll do it in a day easily. Maxim stared at the broken radio. It sat in pieces, yet Pavel's voice continued. I know it's outside your normal duties, but you're the closest one. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Fedorov's been out here 15 years. He knows the forest. If something happened to him, Pavel's voice trailed off meaningfully. Rule 8 pulsed in Maxim's mind. Don't trust the radio if it says help is coming and you didn't call for it. But this was different. This was asking him to go somewhere, to leave the cabin, to walk 15 kilometers through forest where things waited in the dark. No, Maxim said to the empty room. The radio went silent. Then, sorry, didn't catch that. Radio's cutting out. Just confirm you'll check on Fedorov tomorrow. Simple welfare check. I said no. Maxim walked to the broken radio and swept it off the shelf. Components scattered across the floor. The voice continued, now coming from everywhere and nowhere. Interesting. Ignatich said no too, for a while. Then he got curious, started asking questions. Wanted to meet Fedorov, compare notes about the strange things happening. We encouraged that, even gave him directions to the old logging camp where Fedorov supposedly kept supplies. Maxim's blood went cold. Ignatich went to the logging camp. The voice laughed, still Pavel's voice, but with something ancient underneath. Ignatich went into the forest looking for a human explanation, looking for someone to blame, someone to fight. He was so relieved to find boot prints, equipment, evidence of a person. It made everything make sense, right up until it didn't. The cabin's temperature dropped. Maxim could see his breath. What happened to him? The voice shifted, became Ignatich's rough growl. I figured it out too late, boy. There's no Fedorov. Hasn't been since 1987. But the southern cordon keeps reporting in. Every 3 days. Regular as clockwork. Merkulov thinks everything's fine down there. Never thinks to ask why Fedorov's voice never ages, never changes. Never wonders why no one's actually seen him in person for decades. Maxim felt the floor tilt under him. The radio transmissions. You've been maintaining the illusion, Ignatich's voice confirmed. Can't have them sending investigators. Can't have them wondering why wardens keep requesting transfers or going mad. Much easier to have a friendly neighbor on the radio. Someone to report that, yes, everything's normal out here. Just the usual forest sounds. Nothing to worry about. The voice changed again. His mother. We've been doing this for a very long time, sweetheart. The forest provides, and we provide for the forest. Fresh awareness, fresh fear, fresh life to feed old hungers. Then Dmitri. The boot prints were real. The equipment at the logging camp was real. We put them there. For Ignatich. For you. For every warden who gets smart enough to ask questions. Give them a human monster to focus on, and they never see the real thing. Maxim's hands were white-knuckled on the carbine. What are you? Silence. Then the sound of footsteps outside. Slow, heavy, circling the cabin. And with each step, a different voice. His father, his ex-wife, his former commanding officer, every person he'd ever known, cycling through like a radio dial. The footsteps stopped at the door. "We're what happens when someone breaks all the rules," said a voice he'd never heard before. Old, female, speaking Russian with an accent from a century ago. "When they stay too long, when they feed us enough, when they become part of the boundary between what is and what shouldn't be." A pause. Ignatich almost joined us. We offered, right at the end, when he understood. But he ran instead. Died human. Weak, but human. The door shuddered, not being struck, just shuddering, like the wood itself was trying to pull free. "You're different, though. You came here already broken, already haunted. The warehouse, the fire, the screaming. You carry ghosts we don't even need to create." The voice became Dmitri's. "We can make it stop, Maxim, all of it. The memories, the guilt, the shaking. Just open the door, step across the threshold, become boundary instead of prisoner." Maxim's hand moved toward the bolt before he caught himself. The offer was tempting in ways that terrified him. To stop feeling, to stop remembering, to become something else, something without pain. His fingers touched the cold metal. "That's it," Dmitri's voice encouraged. "Just a simple movement. The bolt slides, the door opens, everything changes." He yanked his hand back like the bolt had shocked him. "No." His voice was shaking but firm. "I'm not Ignatich. I'm not your previous wardens. I didn't come here to run from what I am. I came here to..." He stopped, realized the truth as he spoke it. "I came here to remember how to fight." The shuddering stopped. The voices went silent. Then laughter, multiple voices overlapping, creating harmonics that shouldn't exist. "Good," they said in unison. "We were hoping you'd say that. The ones who fight last longer, taste better, break more beautifully." The footsteps retreated, fading into the forest, and as they went, one final message in his own voice. "The logging camp is real. Fedorov's body is still there, what's left of it, along with the others. Go see if you want. We'll wait." Dawn came eventually. It always did. Maxim added to the notebook with steady hands. Day 9. It confirmed there's no Fedorov. The southern cordon is empty. Has been for decades. Everything on the radio has been it, maintaining the illusion. The logging camp exists. Bodies there, probably. It wants me to go look, to see the evidence, to confirm the human explanation. Then it'll show me I'm wrong. Classic psychological operation. Create hope, then destroy it. He set down the pen and looked at his sprained ankle, already swelling purple. The injury made the decision for him. He couldn't hike 15 kilometers on this, couldn't go to the logging camp even if he wanted to. He was trapped in the cabin for at least a week while it healed. Trapped with something that could sound like anyone, that wanted him to break, that offered terrible bargains in familiar voices. Maxim opened the carbine and began cleaning it methodically. The ritual was calming, familiar. Each piece had a name, a function, a place. Unlike the forest, which shifted and lied. Unlike the entity, which wore faces like masks. The weapon was honest, limited, but honest. It couldn't kill something that might already be dead, but it could kill him if necessary. If things got bad enough. If he started to turn into what Ignatich almost became. He had one bullet set aside. Just one. Insurance policy. The rest were for fighting, because that's what he'd do. Not run like Ignatich, not bargain, not open the door. Just fight, for however long he could, against something that had been winning this war for decades. The odds were terrible, the enemy incomprehensible, the isolation absolute. But Maxim Kravchenko had survived worse, or so he told himself, there in the morning light, while the forest watched and waited and planned its next move in a game that had been playing since long before he was born. Day 17. Maxim woke to find his woodpile restocked. He'd counted the logs yesterday, 43 pieces, enough for maybe 4 more days. This morning, there were 68, fresh split wood, stacked with military precision. He hadn't heard a thing during the night. No axe sounds, no footfalls. Just silence, and then this. He checked the perimeter with the carbine, limping on his healing ankle. The frost showed tracks, boot prints, size 42 or 43, leading from the forest to the woodpile and back. Human, real. Recent enough that frost hadn't fully formed in the depressions. Someone had been here while he slept, while the entities circled, and had calmly chopped and stacked wood like they were doing a neighbor a favor. A piece of orange surveyor's tape hung from a low branch at the clearing's edge, tied in a specific knot. Maxim recognized it from his security training, a military signal marker indicating safe passage. Someone was trying to communicate, someone who knew tactical signals. He pulled the tape down, studied it. Fresh. The knot was precise, professional. This wasn't the entities playing games. This was human intelligence operating in the same space as the supernatural threat. The question was, ally or additional enemy? Maxim spent the day fortifying and thinking. The entities hadn't come last night. No bell, no voices, no tests. That bothered him more than the attacks. Predators don't stop hunting unless they're digesting a kill or planning something bigger. He checked Ignatich's notebook again, looking for patterns in the dates. The attacks weren't random. They clustered around lunar phases. New moon periods showed the most aggressive activity. The next new moon was in 8 days. That evening, movement caught his eye through the window. A figure at the forest edge, just inside the tree line. Tall, human proportions, wearing practical forestry gear. Not the wrong-shaped thing from the fog, not a mimicry. Just a person, standing there, watching the cabin. Maxim grabbed the carbine and moved to the door. By the time he got outside, the figure was gone. But another piece of orange tape hung from a tree, and beneath it, scratched into the bark, northwest 5 kilometers. Before day 25, day 20 came with fresh snow and a decision that needed making. The orange markers appeared each morning now, creating a trail northwest. Someone was persistently, patiently, trying to lead him somewhere. The rational part of Maxim's brain screamed trap. The desperate part whispered possibility. He'd been alone for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of nightly psychological torture. 3 weeks of not knowing if he was fighting the supernatural or just losing his mind in isolation. He followed the trail. Not all the way, he wasn't that desperate yet, but far enough to see where it led. The markers were spaced professionally, exactly 100 meters apart. Whoever placed them knew land navigation. After 2 kilometers, Maxim stopped. Ahead, the forest changed. The trees grew differently, twisted and old. and hanging from a branch was something that made his blood ice: a radio. Old Soviet military model, suspended by paracord, slowly rotating in the breeze. Maxim approached carefully. The radio was real, solid, powered off. A piece of paper was tucked under the antenna, protected from snow by a plastic bag. He unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, controlled. They listened to all transmissions. This radio has never been used. Can't be compromised. Turn it on at midnight tonight. I'll be waiting. That night, Maxim sat at his table with the Soviet radio in front of him. It could be exactly what it claimed: a secure line of communication. Or it could be bait, something that would invite the entities in the moment he powered it on. His watch ticked toward midnight. At 23:58, he made his decision. Turned the dial. Static hissed to life. At exactly midnight, the static cut out. A woman's voice, rough and local. "Don't speak, just listen. Click the transmit button once if you understand." Maxim clicked once. The voice continued. "Good. I'm Elena. I've been watching you for 2 weeks. You're doing better than most, but you won't survive the new moon alone. The entities operate on cycles. They've been testing you. In 8 days, they'll stop testing." A pause. "I'm leaving a package at the northern marker tomorrow. Take it or don't. But if you want to live past day 25, you'll need what's inside." Maxim clicked twice, his own code for a question. The voice seemed to understand. "You want to know if this is real, if I'm human. I don't have proof you'd believe. But ask yourself, would they bother with this? They have easier ways to break you. They don't need elaborate deceptions." Another pause. "The package will be there at dawn. I won't contact you again unless you choose to find me. The decision is yours." The radio went dead. Maxim sat in the silence, weighing possibilities. Elena, if that was really her name, was right about one thing. The entities had demonstrated capabilities far beyond elaborate radio games. When they wanted to hurt him, they used his mother's voice, Dmitri's screams, his own deepest wounds. This felt different, more human, more desperate. Dawn found him at the northern marker. A weatherproof bag hung from the branch. Inside, a notebook, a hand-drawn map, and a photograph. The photo showed a man in Soviet-era forestry uniform standing in front of a cabin. This cabin, written on the back, Fedorov, 1985. The notebook was old, pages filled with cramped observations, dates, entity behavior patterns, lunar correlations, years of data. The final entry, dated 1987. "They're adapting faster than I can document. Elena, if you find this, don't try to help the wardens. Just survive." Maxim read through the notebook in his cabin, doors locked, windows covered. Fedorov had been methodical, scientific even. He'd documented 3 distinct entities, each with different capabilities. One controlled sound, the bells, the voices, the mimicry. One controlled perception, the fog, the visual manifestations, the sense of being watched. One controlled physical space, the doors, the bathhouse, the way distances seemed to change. But the most disturbing entry was dated March 1987. "Saw Merkulov today during supply drop, mentioned the entities. He didn't seem surprised, didn't seem concerned. Just said, 'Maintain your post, that's your duty.' He knows, they all know. The Forestry Service has been feeding this place for decades. We're not wardens, we're offerings." Maxim set down the notebook. If that was true, then extraction wasn't coming. Merkulov wasn't ignorant. The system knew and accepted what happened out here. The wardens who requested transfers or retired early They were expected casualties, a price paid to something old and hungry in exchange for, what? The forest's resources? Something else? Day 23. Maxim made a decision. He followed the orange markers northwest, carbine ready, moving carefully. After 5 kilometers, the forest opened into a clearing he'd never seen on any map. And there, impossible but real, sat 3 small cabins arranged in a triangle around a central fire pit. Smoke rose from one chimney. A woman emerged, 50s, gray hair, rifle slung casually over her shoulder. She studied him for a long moment. "You came," she said, not surprised, just confirming. "I'm Elena. We have 2 days before the new moon. That's not enough time to teach you everything, but it's enough to give you a chance." She gestured to the other cabins. "There are 2 others here. They'll want to meet you. But first, you need to understand something important." She walked to the fire pit, Maxim following warily. "My father wasn't killed by the entities. He killed himself. Left me his research as a warning, not a guide. But I came anyway, trying to understand. Spent 3 years documenting what he missed." Elena's eyes were hard. "The entities are real, but they're not invincible. They have rules, limitations, patterns. My father proved that. Survived 15 years by learning their boundaries." "Then why did he kill himself?" Maxim kept the carbine ready. Elena smiled without humor. "Because survival isn't the same as living. 15 years of this, the nightly tests, the isolation, the constant fear, it changes you, hollows you out. My father survived the entities, but couldn't survive what he became." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing scars. Not random, deliberate cuts forming patterns. "There are things older than the entities in this forest. Older bargains. I made one 3 years ago. Traded part of myself for knowledge, for protection. It's why I can move safely, why they don't hunt me." She let the sleeve fall. "I can teach you the patterns, the safe routes, the timing. But I can't make the choice for you. Fight alone and maybe die clean. Or join us and live compromised." Maxim's grip tightened on the carbine. "What kind of bargain?" Elena gestured to the forest. "That's not a conversation for day 1. First, you need to survive the new moon. Then we talk about costs." She started toward one of the cabins. "You have 2 days to learn what my father spent 15 years discovering. We should start now." "Wait." Maxim didn't lower the weapon. "How do I know this isn't them? Another test? Another game?" Elena turned back, and for the first time, he saw something raw in her eyes. Fear. Real, human fear. "You don't. You can't. That's the point. Out here, certainty is a luxury none of us have. You make your best guess and live with the consequences." She paused. "But consider this. If I was them, you'd already be dead. They don't need elaborate deceptions. They have your voice, your memories, your ghosts. If they wanted you broken, you'd be broken." She was right. The entities had demonstrated enough power that this level of subterfuge seemed redundant, unless that was exactly what they wanted him to think. The paranoia spiral was dizzying. Maxim made a choice based on the only thing he had left: instinct. The same instinct that had kept him alive in the warehouse, that had pulled him from the fire when logic said to lie down and let it end. 2 days, he said. Teach me what you can. Then I decide. Elena nodded. Fair enough. Come inside. The others will want to meet the new candidate. She walked toward the nearest cabin. Maxim followed, every sense screaming danger, but his feet moving anyway. Because the alternative was going back to his cabin alone, waiting for the new moon, waiting for the entities to stop testing and start finishing. Inside, the cabin was warm, surprisingly well-appointed. Two people sat at a rough table, a man in his 60s, scarred and silent, and a younger woman, maybe 30, with eyes that had seen too much. Neither spoke, just watched Maxim with the wariness of people who'd survived by trusting no one. "This is Mikhail," Elena gestured to the old man, "and Irina. They've been here 6 years and 4 years, respectively. Before that, they were wardens like you. They chose to stay, to learn, to adapt." She poured something dark from a kettle, tea or something stronger. "We maintain the balance, keep the entities fed just enough that they stay contained to this territory. And we survive by knowing their patterns better than they know ours." Maxim didn't sit. "Fed how?" The room went very quiet. Mikhail spoke for the first time, voice like gravel. "Sometimes hunters come too deep. Sometimes researchers ignore warnings. Sometimes people just get lost." He met Maxim's eyes. "The forest takes them anyway. We just don't interfere, don't warn them. That's the price of our knowledge." The temperature seemed to drop. Maxim understood what they were saying. They weren't just survivors. They were collaborators, letting others die to maintain their own safety. "That's not survival," he said quietly. "That's sacrifice of other people." Irina laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think you're different? You think fighting alone makes you noble? The entities will break you, and when they do, you'll hurt people too. You'll scream the names of everyone you love, and they'll use those names on the next warden. We're just honest about the cost." Elena raised a hand, silencing them. "Enough. He's not ready for this conversation." She looked at Maxim. "You have 2 days to learn patterns and limitations. What you do with that knowledge is your choice. But the new moon is coming, whether you're ready or not." Maxim left before sunset, Elena's map tucked in his jacket alongside Fedorov's notebook. The walk back to his cabin was tense, watching for followers, watching for signs that this had all been an elaborate trap. But he made it back alone, locked himself in, and spread the documents on his table. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to decide if he was a fighter, a survivor, or something else entirely. That night, the entities came with new intensity. Voices of people he'd never told anyone about. Memories he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten them. They were escalating, preparing for something. The new moon would be their apex, and Maxim would either meet it armed with knowledge or die ignorant. He added to his notebook in steady handwriting. Day 23. Found other survivors. They've made compromises I'm not sure I can live with, but they have information I need. 2 days to learn everything. Then the new moon. Then we see what I'm really made of. Outside, something laughed in his dead mother's voice. Inside, Maxim loaded the carbine and began memorizing patterns from Fedorov's research. Knowledge was a weapon, maybe the only one that mattered. The forest watched and waited, patient as centuries, hungry as always. Day 25 arrived wrong. Maxim woke to find the cabin rotated 90 degrees. Not moved, rotated. The door that had faced east now faced north. The windows looked out on forest he'd never seen before. But when he stepped outside, his boot prints from yesterday were still there, leading to a door that no longer existed in that wall. Space had reorganized itself overnight, and the forest hadn't bothered to hide the seams. He checked his watch. 6:47 a.m. Checked the calendar scratched into the wall. New moon tonight. The entities weren't waiting for darkness. They were rewriting the rules of engagement early, establishing dominance, showing him that everything he thought he understood about physical reality was negotiable. Maxim spent the morning trying to maintain routine, but routine required consistency, and consistency had left with the sun's predictable path. His shadow pointed west when it should point east. The river's sound came from the wrong direction, and when he went to check his woodpile, he found it exactly as it should be, except the logs were stacked in reverse order, newest on bottom, oldest on top. Someone or something had disassembled and reassembled his entire supply, perfectly inverted. At noon, the first one came, not circling, not testing, just arriving. Maxim saw it through the window, a shape moving between trees, too tall, limbs bending at joints that didn't match human anatomy. It moved with the jerky quality of film played at wrong speed, sometimes fluid, sometimes stuttering forward in ways that hurt to watch. When it reached the clearing's edge, it stopped and looked directly at the cabin. At him. The face was everyone. Maxim saw his mother's eyes, Dmitri's jawline, his own nose, Pavel's scar, features sliding and reconfiguring like a deck of cards being shuffled. The thing opened its mouth and sounds came out. Not words, but the audio of his entire life played simultaneously. Every conversation he'd ever had, every scream from the warehouse, every laugh, every cry, compressed into a single, layered nightmare of noise. Then it stepped into the clearing. The grass where its feet touched didn't bend. It blackened, withered, died instantly. Each step left a perfect circle of dead earth. The thing was halfway to the cabin when Maxim raised the carbine and fired. The shot was perfect, center mass. The bullet hit and passed through, leaving a hole that didn't bleed. The thing looked down at the wound, then back at Maxim, and smiled with too many teeth arranged in spirals. It kept coming. Maxim fired again, emptying the magazine into something that registered hits but not damage. The thing reached the door and pressed one hand against the wood. Where it touched, the door began to rot, aging decades in seconds. Maxim grabbed the iron nails he'd laid across the threshold and threw them at the figure. They passed through its body and clattered on the ground behind it, useless. The thing pulled its hand back. The door's rot stopped but didn't reverse. "Iron," it said in Maxim's mother's voice. How quaint. Did Fedorov's notebook mention that we learned to ignore iron in 1967? Did it mention we adapt? The voice shifted to Dmitri's. Every warden teaches us something new. Every desperate attempt shows us another weakness to overcome. You're not fighting eternal beings. You're fighting evolutionary processes. We learn. We improve. Maxim backed away from the door. The thing didn't follow. It just stood there, rotting the wood further with its mere presence. "The others will arrive at sunset," it continued in Ignatich's rough growl. "When we're all here, the real work begins. Until then, consider this. Elena made her choice 7 years ago. She survived by becoming boundary. Mikhail and Irina the same. Even Fedorov, at the end, made a choice. Death over transformation. What will yours be?" It walked away, each step killing a perfect circle of grass. Maxim watched it disappear into the forest and immediately began reinforcing the door with every piece of timber he could find. The work was frantic, desperate, probably useless. But motion kept the fear manageable, kept him from thinking too hard about what sunset would bring. At 3 p.m., the second one announced itself differently. No physical approach. Instead, Maxim heard breathing inside the cabin walls. Wet, rhythmic, coming from inside the logs themselves. He pressed his ear to the wood and heard it clearly. Lungs inflating and deflating, a heartbeat, the sound of something alive occupying the space between boards. The cabin had become a ribcage, and he was inside something's chest. He pulled back and saw the walls moving. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but definitely moving. Expanding and contracting with each breath. The floorboards bent slightly underfoot, flexing like skin over muscle. Maxim was standing inside something that was becoming animate, and there was nowhere to go because outside was where the first thing waited. You know what's funny about humans? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that bypassed ears and spoke directly into his mind. You think consciousness requires a brain. That thought requires neurons. But we've been thinking for millennia without biology. We're the forest's dream of itself. We're what happens when landscape becomes aware and decides to play. The walls breathed faster. The cabin was hyperventilating. You can't fight us with weapons. We're not physical enough for that. And you can't fight us with will alone. We're too patient. We'll just wait until your will exhausts itself. The voice became sympathetic, almost kind. Fedorov understood that eventually, realized the only winning move was to remove himself from the game entirely. Is that your plan too? Maxim looked at the carbine, at the single bullet he'd loaded last. The insurance policy, the exit strategy. No, he said aloud, because Fedorov lasted 15 years, and if he could last 15, I can last until my contract ends. 11 months, that's all I need. The breathing stopped. The walls went still. Then laughter, genuine and delighted. 11 months! He thinks he can last 11 months. The voice multiplied, became a chorus. Ignatich thought the same. Made it 3 weeks past his 1-year mark before he broke and ran. The strong ones always last just past their exit window, just long enough to think they might make it indefinitely. Then we show them the truth. At 5 p.m., shadows stopped working correctly. Maxim's shadow detached from his feet and walked to the corner where it stood independent, watching him. The stove's shadow stretched across the ceiling. The table's shadow pointed up instead of down. And in those incorrect shadows, figures moved. Dozens of them, hundreds. All previous wardens, Maxim realized. All the men who'd stood where he stood, made their choices and been consumed or transformed or driven to flight. They didn't speak, just watched with empty eyes, witnesses to what was coming, or warnings, or previews. Sunset arrived at 6:03 p.m. Maxim watched through the cracked window as the sun touched the horizon, and something in the forest woke up. The trees moved, though there was no wind. The ground rippled like water. And from 3 directions, figures approached. The tall one that had come at noon. Something new that looked like a column of black smoke in roughly human shape. And a third that Maxim couldn't look at directly. His eyes slid off it, refusing to process what they saw. They converged on the cabin, surrounded it, and the space inside Maxim's sanctuary began to fold. The far wall was suddenly close enough to touch, the ceiling pressed down, the floor tilted at impossible angles. He was inside a box being compacted, crushed into smaller and smaller space. He pressed his back against the door, the only surface that still felt solid, and raised the carbine. What exactly are you planning to shoot? The tall one's voice came from behind him, though it stood in front. We're not targets, we're contexts. We're the framework reality uses to organize itself in this place. You can't kill us any more than you can kill the concept of North. The smoke figure flowed through the wall without opening it, materializing inside the cabin. Up close, Maxim could see it was made of thousands of insects, flying in tight formation, creating the illusion of solidity. "We don't want to kill you," it said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "Dead wardens are boring. They stop generating fear, stop making choices. We want you alive and conscious for what comes next." The third figure, the one Maxim couldn't see directly, spoke from every direction at once. "The transformation isn't painful. That's what they all expect. Agony, violation, horror. But it's actually peaceful. You'll feel yourself expanding, becoming distributed. Your consciousness will spread through the forest. You'll be everywhere and nowhere. It's transcendence, really. We're offering you immortality." Maxim's hand tightened on the carbine. "You're offering me extinction, dissolution. That's not immortality. That's death by another name." The tall one tilted its head. "Is it, though? Elena still exists, still thinks, feels, acts. She's just more than she was. Part of the larger system, connected to something greater than individual existence." "She's a prisoner," Maxim said. "You keep her here. Keep all of them. Let them pretend they chose it, but they can't leave." The entities moved closer, the cabin shrinking further around them. "Can you leave your body?" the smoke figure asked. "Can you exist without oxygen, without water? These aren't prisons, they're requirements. Elena requires the forest now the way you require air. It's not captivity. It's ecology." The cabin was barely large enough to stand in now. Maxim could feel the entities pressing in, not physically, but spatially, occupying the same coordinates his body needed, overlapping him, preparing to merge. "Last chance," the tall one said, its shuffling face settling briefly on Dmitri's features. "Join willingly. Make it meaningful. Or we'll take you anyway, and it will mean nothing." Maxim looked at the carbine, at the bullet meant for himself, and he understood with crystal clarity that this was the real choice. Not fight or surrender, not join or refuse. The choice was how much of himself he could preserve in the inevitable. Because they were right. He couldn't kill them, couldn't escape them, couldn't win. But he could choose how he lost. He dropped the carbine, raised his empty hands. "If you're taking me anyway, then there's no point in fighting." The entities paused, surprised. "You're surrendering?" They sounded almost disappointed. "No," Maxim said. "I'm standing still. There's a difference." He closed his eyes. "You want to absorb me? Distribute my consciousness? Make me part of the forest? Fine, do it. But you'll have to do it to someone who isn't fighting or fleeing or choosing. You'll have to do it to someone who's just here, present, witnessing. And maybe that's not as satisfying as breaking someone." The cabin went absolutely silent. Maxim stood with eyes closed, hands open, posture relaxed. Not resigned, present, occupying his body fully, consciously, with complete awareness. If they wanted him, they'd have to take him from himself. And he was discovering that's harder than it sounds. Because presence requires participation. And he wasn't participating in their game anymore. Time stopped having meaning. Maxim existed in an eternal now, breathing, heartbeat, the feeling of floor under his feet. The entities pressed closer, but couldn't seem to close the final distance. Every time they tried to overlap his space, he was simply there, fully occupying it, leaving no room for intrusion. Finally, with a sound like fabric tearing, reality snapped back. The cabin expanded to normal size. The entities withdrew. Maxim opened his eyes to find all three watching him, with something that might have been confusion. "Interesting," the tall one said slowly. That's new. Dawn light was seeping through the window. Impossible. Only minutes had passed. But the sun was rising, the new moon was over, and Maxim was still himself, still separate, still human. The entities faded, becoming translucent. "We'll be back," they said in unison. 28 days. We'll be ready for this next time." Then they were gone. Maxim collapsed against the wall, shaking. Not from fear, from exhaustion. He'd just spent what felt like hours in a state of meditation so intense it had apparently prevented supernatural entities from absorbing his consciousness. He had no idea how he'd done it, whether he could do it again, or what it even meant. The door opened. Elena stood there, looking at him with wide eyes. "What did you do?" she whispered. "We felt it, all of us. You didn't fight, didn't join, didn't run. You just existed, so completely that they couldn't fit you into their framework." Maxim stood on unsteady legs. "Is that good?" Elena laughed, and it was the first genuine sound he'd heard from her. "I don't know. No one's ever done it before. Fedorov fought for 15 years, and it wore him down. The others joined and lost themselves. Ignatich ran and died. But you," she shook her head, "you found something else. I'm not sure what, but it worked." She turned to leave, then paused. "They'll be ready next time. They'll adapt, figure out how to counter it. They always do." Maxim nodded. "Then I'll have to adapt too. Find something else, something new." Elena studied him for a long moment. 7 years I've been here. 7 years of watching wardens break or bend. You're the first one who did neither." She smiled sadly. "Maybe that's what we needed to see, that there's a third option, even if we can't take it anymore." After she left, Maxim added to the notebook, "Day 25. Survived the new moon by refusing to play. Didn't fight, didn't surrender, just existed so completely they couldn't absorb me. Don't know if it will work again. Don't know if I can maintain that state of presence for another full moon. But I found something they didn't expect, a strategy that isn't in their playbook. That's worth something." He closed the notebook and looked out at the forest. The entities would return, would adapt, would find new approaches, and he'd have to evolve too, find new ways to remain himself against forces that wanted to unmake him. It was an arms race that might last 11 months or 11 years, or until one side exhausted their innovations. But today, he'd won. Not by defeating them, not by escaping them, but by showing them a human could occupy space so completely that even ancient entities couldn't dislodge him. It was a small victory, temporary, probably unsustainable, but it was his. 3 days later, Pavel radioed. "Kravchenko, you missed check-in again." Maxim looked at the repaired cabin, at the dead circles of grass outside, at the notebook filled with impossible truths. "Everything's fine, just busy." Silence. Then, "Merkulov's pleased with your reports. Says you're adapting well to the isolation. Most wardens struggle more. More implication, more knowing." "Tell Merkulov I'll complete my contract," Maxim said. 1 year, then we'll see." He signed off before Pavel could respond, because the truth was, he didn't know what would happen in 11 months. Didn't know if he could sustain this strategy, this existential resistance. Didn't know if he'd eventually break or bend or find some fourth option no one had documented. But he knew this. He'd survived 1 new moon by being so completely himself that even entities that could reshape reality couldn't reshape him. And if he could do it once, maybe he could do it again, and again, until either he exhausted their patience or they exhausted his presence. The forest stood silent, processing this new data point. Somewhere in its depths, three ancient beings were adapting their strategy, and in a cabin on its edge, one human was doing the same. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun. But the first battle had ended in a stalemate. And sometimes, a stalemate is the best you can hope for. Sometimes, not losing is the same as winning. Maxim cleaned the carbine and removed the bullet he'd set aside. He wouldn't need that escape. Not yet. He'd found something better than death or transformation. He'd found presence, complete, conscious, unwavering existence. And as long as he could maintain that, he could remain himself. Even in a forest that wanted to make him into something else, even against entities older than human language, even for 11 more months, 28 days at a time. The cabin's shadow fell correctly now. The sun followed predictable paths. Reality had returned to its normal rules, until the next new moon, until the next test, until the next evolution in an eternal game between human consciousness and whatever hunted it in the dark. Maxim Kravchenko was ready, or as ready as anyone could be for a war that couldn't be won, only endured. He looked at the forest, and the forest looked back, neither blinking, neither surrendering, just two opposed forces, locked in eternal contestation. And somewhere in that stalemate, Maxim found something like peace.